Hi, it's Penny here, and in this video we're going to be looking at the longest series that I've read. The other day I did a video about the longest books that I've read, like individual books, and a lot of those were part of series, and there is some overlap with this list, but some series, even though the individual books are not that long, the series is long, so they actually work out as longer than some of the shorter series that have really long books. So as I said with that video, I am using word count to determine the length of these books, and I've based it on what it says on the Kobo store, which I think sometimes varies depending on editions and whatever, but close enough. Also, before I get into my top 10, I wanted to mention a couple of series that didn't make it onto this list. Firstly, the Babysitters Club books. I didn't put it on this list because it's not a fantasy series like the rest of these, and also I think I've read at least 75, maybe 100 of these books, and when I thought about adding up all those word counts, like looking up the word counts and then adding them up, no, I wasn't going to do that. But I estimate that I've read at least 2 million words of the Babysitters Club books. So that's pretty long. Then I also wanted to mention both the Dresden Files and the Kate Daniels series, because both of these kind of came up in positions 11 and 12. And also, I feel like these are very comparable. So both of them kind of follow these private investigators in like a supernatural world. Harry Dresden is a wizard, and Kate Daniels is more of a mercenary in this kind of like post-apocalyptic world where magic has started to come back into the world and is causing all sorts of problems. Also, contrastingly, the Dresden Files I disliked more and more as the series went on, and because I actually only read the first 13 books, I've read I think about 1,666,000 words of the Dresden Files. That's a lot when you consider that I didn't really like the series, or at least I liked it. I liked it sometimes, but a lot of it I didn't. Then conversely, with Kate Daniels, I just love the series the whole time, and if I include the spin-off series and the novellas, as well as the main 10-book series, then it comes to 1,752,000 words. So I've kind of read like very similar amounts of both of those series, and it's interesting that one I still want more and more of, and the other I don't know. Part of me lately has been thinking maybe I should finish off the Dresden Files. It's only like 4 books, I think, that have actually been released, and then there's going to be some more at some point, but honestly, who knows when. But I also wonder if I'm just forgetting about all the things I hated about Harry Dresden as a person. A fictional person, but still someone I really didn't like. But anyway, Dresden Files I think is way more popular than the Kate Daniels series, at least amongst certain circles. If you like the Dresden Files, I would thoroughly recommend the Kate Daniels series. Kind of similar. Different, but similar. Okay, then getting into the list properly. At number 10, with 1,752,000 words, we have A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. Now, obviously, if we ever get Winds of Winter, and what's the next one going to be called? Something to do with summer. If we ever get those, that will bump this series up in the list, because I will read them whenever they come out. So I did mention A Dance of Dragons in my other longest book video, so I won't go into it too much. But in general, the me that read this quite a long time ago didn't love the series. I'm looking forward to a reread at some point though, whenever those next books come out. And actually now what I'm thinking is, with a lot of these long series, at different times I have reread books in the series. So these word counts are just for if you read through the series once, but actually a lot of these I would have read even more words in the series because I've read them multiple times. That's a lot of words. Then at number 9 we have the Crown of Stars series by Kate Elliott. So this is another epic fantasy, actually very similar to A Song of Ice and Fire in that we have kind of these different kingdoms battling over the throne, but there's like a dark magical threat happening at the same time. The good thing about the Crown of Stars series though is that it is complete. So the Crown of Stars series has 1,846,000 words. I do think if A Song of Ice and Fire gets finished, it would overtake Crown of Stars, but it hasn't yet. Then at number 8 we have a 10-book series that has 1,939,000 words, and that is The First Law World by Joe Abercrombie. So this starts out with an original trilogy, then 3 more standalone novels, a short story anthology, and another trilogy. None of these books individually made it onto my longest books list, but because there's 10 books, this is a pretty decently long series. I guess high level you could say it's a very similar plot to A Song of Ice and Fire and Crown of Stars in that we have different kingdoms battling against each other at the same time as there's a dark magical threat. Maybe I should see how many series in this list that plot summary could apply to. But anyway, this is a particularly grimdark series with also a lot of humor, a lot of really great lines. I did enjoy it, although I like the first trilogy the most of the whole series. Then at number 7, with 1,947,000 words, we have the Elemental Assassin series by Jennifer Estep. So this series is kind of a bit of a paranormal romance series. We're following this woman named Jin, who is also the assassin called the Spider, and in some ways each of these books is very formulaic. There'll be some kind of magical threat come into town and then Jin will take them down, because even though she's an assassin, she mostly is an assassin of bad guys, and she kind of builds this found family throughout the series, as well as having some romances. I like this series. I do think it went on a little bit long. Each of these books is actually not that long, but there are 19 books in the series, as well as several novellas and short stories that I don't actually think I counted in the word count because I already added up 19 things and I was tired. But I would say, even though I just said 19 books was too many, I think actually until about book 15, this series was pretty solid. Like, even though the books were fairly formulaic, every book kind of added something new, and every book was written with like so much momentum that I found them really quick to fly through. So I would say actually, if you like Dresden Files or Kate Daniels and you don't mind a little bit of paranormal romance, then the Elemental Assassin series could be worth a go. Then at number 6, we have the Dragons of Pern series by Anne McCaffrey, and actually some of the later books were written by her son, Todd McCaffrey. I've only counted 18 books because that's how many books I read in the series, and I kind of wanted to make this list based on what I've read. But there are more books that you could read, so then this would be even higher. Although I'm not sure if it would have made its way past number 5, because number 5 I didn't actually read all of either, but we'll get to that. Anyway, The Dragons of Pern, if you haven't heard of this series, is kind of a classic fantasy sci-fi in this world where every few hundred years or so, this thread will fall from the sky and just destroy anything that it touches. So the people of this world have dragons that are able to burn the thread out of the sky. I think the series starts when the thread hasn't come for a little while, and as a result, the dragon riders haven't been fully supported, and like everyone's quite unprepared for the coming thread fall. So I did feel like the writing quality dropped off over time in these books, but at the same time I would always say Anne McCaffrey was investigating like different political situations in quite an interesting way, all of course with this backdrop of dragons. So if you like dragons and politics, this is a good series to try. An older series, so you've got to be willing to put up with a little bit of older writing, and I know that perhaps some of Anne McCaffrey's views were somewhat not the best at times, but at other times I think she would have some really interesting and important perspectives put forward in these books. So I definitely think worth picking up if it's something you're interested in and you don't mind reading kind of like older fantasy sci-fi and putting up with like what that means for writing style. Oh, and talking of writing style, so the next book series at number 5 with 3,459,000 words, or at least that's how many I read, is The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan and eventually finished off by Brandon Sanderson. So I cheated with this series. I've written down that I read 11 books. There's actually 14 books I think in the series, 15 if you count the prequel. I kind of just skipped the middle of the series because I got bored and I read the plot summaries instead. And I know some people will say I missed out on a lot doing it that way, and honestly, I don't think so. Maybe a little bit, but not enough to ever want to go back and actually read them. So obviously if I counted the word count for all of the books in this series, it would have been slightly higher. But I do also notice that there's quite a big jump between the word count of The Dragons of Pern and then this word count for The Wheel of Time. It's almost like once book series get to a certain length, they just like can't help themselves but keep going. Anyway, The Wheel of Time is about kind of this group of young people who find themselves embroiled in this bigger cyclical battle between the light and the dark, and kind of escalates and then in the middle drags for quite a long time. If you like to be part of fantasy conversations, I think it's worth a read, but otherwise, it wasn't my favourite. Then at number 4 with 3,814,000 words is The Saga of Recluse, and actually this is another series where I've only read the first 20 books in the series. I think now it's up to like 25 or something. I'm a little bit undecided whether I should continue or not, because this is kind of in this world where there is auto magic and chaos magic, and really it's all about finding the balance between the two. And throughout the series at different times, the order mages will be the bad guys, and then sometimes the chaos mages will be the bad guys, and it's always about different characters trying to find their place or trying to find balance. But even though a lot of these stories can be read on their own, there are also kind of a lot of interconnections between the stories, and certain groups of books do form a bigger narrative. So I feel like at this point, because it's been so long since I read some of those earlier books and I've forgotten a lot of the details, I would like to reread the whole series so that I could then pick up on like callbacks to those initial things in the later books. However, because it's such a long series, I feel like that's never going to be possible, because I'm never going to be able to read from book 1 to book 25 in a short enough period that when I get to book 25, I still remember book 1. So I feel like the Saga of Recluse has kind of gotten to a length where I just don't really know how to like fully take in the whole series and somehow keep it all inside me. Like, I just don't know what to do with that series anymore. It's too much. Although interestingly, I don't feel the same about the next series, which is even longer. Oh, just longer. So maybe actually the full series beyond what I've read is probably longer for the Saga of Recluse. But anyway, at number 3, we have The Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson. I've just grouped them all together. So based on my calculations and the books that I have read, which I'm pretty sure I've read all of The Cosmere at this point, except for Wind and Truth coming out next month. So I think I've read 3,814,000 words of The Cosmere. But I think what The Cosmere does that the Saga of Recluse doesn't do is it's broken into smaller sub-series, and that's true of the next 2 series as well. So while with the Saga of Recluse I just feel completely overwhelmed with that series, the other bigger world series, I feel like I can still deal with them because I can break them down into pieces and understand them in separate pieces. Maybe I will change my mind about that as the Cosmere gets more and more interconnected. I did just read The Lost Metal, and I felt like that had a lot of Cosmere lore just dumped on the story, and it did bury it a bit, I think. And I feel like if Sanderson wants to start mixing all these different worlds that he's created together, it is going to start to feel overwhelming, because you will feel like you need to have read so many things just to read the new latest book and to be able to understand all the references. So I guess we'll see. Then at number 2, with 4,039,000 words, we have the Valdemar series by Mercedes Lackey. So this is actually the series that really solidified my love of fantasy. I found the Arrows or Heralds of Valdemar series at the library when I think I was like 12, 13. And then I continued to read through most of the Valdemar books. So this is another series where I haven't actually completely read the series. It's possible I don't want to read all the books, but there definitely are still more I would like to read. So this will bump up at some point and possibly make its way to number 1, because there's not that far up to number 1's word count. So the Valdemar series, again, is broken up into lots of smaller series, mostly trilogies. I did do another video where I worked out like a reading order and like all the connections between those different series. And I feel like because I started reading that series when I was so young and then have just like slowly built it up incrementally, like built up my knowledge of the series incrementally, it doesn't feel as overwhelming to me. Even though when I look at the diagram I made of the reading order, I can see why it might be overwhelming to some people. Anyway, this is a series primarily following the Heralds of Valdemar, which are like magical assistants to the crown, let's call them. Usually they will have some kind of magical ability, and also they always have a magical horse companion, because these companions are the ones who actually select people to become heralds. I will always be thankful to the Valdemar books for teaching me a lot about the world. So I love this series, even though I am afraid, I always say this every time I mention it, I'm kind of afraid if I go back and reread the series that it won't be to my taste anymore. Because as I said, I started reading this series when I was in my early teens, and that was a long time ago at this point. And my reading tastes have changed a lot, as you would expect. But then, with number 1, we have a series that I definitely still enjoy, because it hasn't been that long since I finished reading it. Although long enough that I would like to do a reread if I could somehow find the time for it. But I don't have the time for it, because this series has 4,231,000 words, and maybe a little bit more, because I think I missed counting a few short stories here and there. But anyway, this is The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. I have a whole shelf dedicated to it down here. I love this series. So 9 of the books in the series primarily follow Fitz, who is the bastard son of the king in waiting. Initially, he trains to be an assassin and is very involved in the politics and the magic of the world, and has some really awful, tragic things happen to him. There's also a couple of other series, one that follows the live ships, which are these ships that once they've been in a family for several generations will like gain a soul and become like a sentient being. And then we have the Rainwild Chronicles, which is kind of set in a similar location, except it's more focused around dragons. So as I said, I really love this series. It is a very emotional one, and I do look forward to rereading it at some point. I don't know when I'll have time though, because I think it took me about 2 years to read the original series. So anyway, those were the longest series that I have read. Let me know if you've read any of them. I would love to chat with you about them down in the comments. Or let me know if you think there's any series that you've read that are even longer, especially if they're ones that you've loved. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.